Hey guys, so a friend of mine sent me a pretty decent interview with the paramedic talking to a pretty well-known, I guess, podcaster. I think he's a biologist, I believe. I don't know much about him. I don't follow him or whatever, and I never heard of this paramedic. So, um, evidently he got really big on TikTok at some point, trying to get a message out or whatever. I was deleted everywhere, so I couldn't do anything. So I'm going to put an interview I did on SUT Report back in 2022, April of 2022, I believe. I'm going to tag it to the end of this end of this intro right here. I'm going to tag it to that, and I'm also going to link that interview with that paramedic. From listening to the video, he got terminated, but he ended up getting his job back because of manpower. They were so bad off on staff, and they needed they needed him back. Um, but anyway, there's some interesting things that they talk about on there, especially like numbers and stuff like that, statistics, and and that's what I've been trying to talk about and explain to people for a long time. But statistics, graphs, um, all-cause mortality doesn't really mean anything to anybody. It only means stuff to folks like us who do this work. So who have done this work. So I was an acting EMS supervisor. And I was an acting EMS supervisor for almost 10 years before all this stuff happened. And so I had access due to my acting officer status as an EMS supervisor. I had access to our report system, which was Emergent. I had administrative rights. I can make graphs, charts. I can show you all the statistics. I could show you everything that's in our system. I could make a chart or a graph for it. And that's what I was doing. And what people don't understand about 2020 is 2020 was one of the most quiet years our fire department and many fire departments were seeing and hospitals. The only bad thing about going into the hospital is those protocols. That's when your life changed. I saw it with some of our own people. I saw some of our own people go in, fine, just like me right now. Just like me right now talking to you. No shortness of breath, nothing. They go in and test positive. They call back to their command staff. I'm talking about in the public safety. They call back their command staff. What do you want me to do? They're asking their command staff what they want them to do with their own body and their own health. It's so strange to me. But anyway, what does command staff say? Command staff recommends whatever the ER doctor recommends. And that's what they did. So I've seen tons of people go away from here listening to the command staff, tell them to listen to the doctors of protocol, the protocol doctors, if you will. And it just breaks my heart that what we're seeing now is a totally different aftermath that just keeps coming and keeps coming. And I told my wife, I said, this thing that has happened is changing, is going to change and will change and will continue to change our people big time in more ways than a lot of people will ever understand. But I'll just try to keep it normal here, or so-called normal, for if you can call anything normal anymore. With that being said, here's the interview.
Let me welcome my guest, returning guest, Fire Medic 8 over on Bitchute. He's an 18-year firefighter, paramedic, veteran. Eric, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
All right, we're going to get an update on your situation today. You're going through the fire because you don't want to be forced to do certain things to remain a firefighter, paramedic. Let's bring people up to speed on your fight against, well, I guess it would be your battalion chief, and explain to us why, after 18 years, because you question these mandates, they think you have some sort of behavioral issues.
Right. And so just so you know, they said in an administrative letter that they just sent out to me through the mail, and they also sent it to me to my fire department email. And so in that email, they said that, hey, we have noticed that we have seen a trend over the last 18 months of you having behavioral problems. And so just so you know, my first disciplinary action didn't happen until this past October. So if some type of administrator has seen all these behavioral problems, you would have evidence in place to show me or show somebody that this has been, presented to me at some point in time, whether formal or informal, but they can't do that. But the good thing is, my attorney, the one thing he did say, I haven't sat in front of him yet, but the one thing he did say is that, like, are they trying to hang themselves or whatever? Because did they ever present anything to you of behavioral problems? I said, no. I said, so I think what happened is the one person that probably watched some SGT report back when we did the mask thing, when we showing that there was something in the mask. And then we showed the next video that you did with me. We were showing something with, maybe the vaccinated people were putting off potentially some type of frequency or something like that. And so these videos started circulating in my fire department, and of course they deemed that as bad behavior, some type of misinformation, disinformation type thing. This world that we live in is all about misinformation, disinformation, putting some type of pejorative on you, or you're an anti-vaxxer, or you're anti this, or you're anti that, or whatever. Instead of me just being somebody who sees and that it's observable, measurable, and repeatable. And they don't care about that. They don't care that I'm finding things that are observable, measurable, and repeatable consistently and constantly. But it doesn't mean nothing to nobody. So I have a behavioral problem. And so in this letter, it says 18 months. They can't prove it, but they put it in this format in this letter that will go in my file. And so it's already, it's defamation, it's lying, slander, and it hits so many things on the legalese that they're shooting themselves in the foot. But basically, what I'm going to end up having to do is let them finish the crime. And a lot of firefighters and paramedics don't realize how much the law protects them, actually, especially even the police department. And the police department's Bill of Rights are a little bit different than ours, but kind of the same. But it's basically called the Firefighter Bill of Rights. And your employer, has a code of conduct on how they have to present disciplinary action. They didn't like the fact that I was spreading truth in the fire department. They didn't like the fact that I was telling people, or I was showing them that, hey, look, you're in a clinical trial. They didn't know it. 80% of the people in our fire department that took this shot, they did not know that they were in a clinical trial. Also, my fire chief, I spoke with him 2 hours in sometime around July on the telephone. I was talking, and he himself told me he didn't think twice about it. He got in line and rolled his sleeve up and got it. I said, did you not realize that it's not licensed, unapproved, and it's a clinical trial that's not over, and well, his particular one's not over until 2023. I said, did you know that? And he goes like, well, no. And I shared the clinical trial with him, and he's like baffled. And then I was just telling him, I was trying to get to him, which my lower command staff, the battalion chief and the deputy chief level, didn't want me to get to him. And they didn't like that. They didn't like that I bypassed all of them, because I saw what was going on. They were attacking me, constantly attacking me after I did these 2 videos with you, because they didn't like that I had some type of platform or whatever, that I was able to present my case or tell them how they fell short, especially in the mask. And there are people still wearing masks, and guess what? People are still getting pneumonia off of this, whatever was in those masks. It doesn't make any sense to me. And they just fight against you so hard when you come out with any type of bitter truth that you can prove with documentation from the clinical trial, from the CDC, from OSHA. They don't care. They don't want to hear any of that, because their policy says something else. And that's where we're at right now. I was supposed to get my annual physical
in June, this past June. And my son was in the hospital, in and out of the hospital. And so it didn't get taken care of. So he rescheduled it. My battalion chief rescheduled it to be done by October 1st. So I went to go, I scheduled it September 24th. I was on my way to get it done. And I'm like, you know what, let me call up there first because I'm not going to wear a mask during my physical. And I even hate that I was going to even sit out in the lobby wearing one. It gets under my skin. But I was going to do that, but I was not going to wear a mask during my annual physical. I've already told them it gives me headaches, it makes me tachycardic, and it makes my blood pressure elevate. A lot of things that you don't want to be taking place while you're getting your annual physical. That's just me. And so I called up there. I said, hey, I would appreciate it if during the different sessions or whatever, because it's an all-day event for this NFPA physical we have to do. And I said, let me just relax the mask when they're doing my vitals. Let me relax the mask when you're doing my 12 lead. And they said, absolutely not. I said, okay, well then you can cancel my appointment. So I wrote an email to my chief. Crickets. I didn't hear nothing to him until October 1st. And then October 1st, he calls me. I'm on shift. He calls me and says, Eric, I already told you to get this physical done. He said, are you going to go get it done right now? I've already scheduled it for you. I said, so I didn't consent to it the first time. I said, do you understand what consent is? I said, I don't think you do. I didn't consent to it. I said, you can't make me go. And then I said, I'm going to start recording you. And then he went ballistic on me. And then he said, well, you just write a letter and say, hey, that I'm not going. I said, I've already wrote you a letter saying what's going on. I said, you chose not to come to talk to your fireman, your firefighter. You chose not to come talk to me. Other now you're intimidating me and you're pushing me to do something I didn't consent to. And so now leapfrog from October 1st to October 18th. And this is where they start to violate the firefighter Bill of Rights. Is you have to make notice. You have to give the firefighter notice. First, you have to give them notice that you're actually going to take disciplinary action against them. They didn't do that. I never knew from October 1st to October 18th that some type of disciplinary action was going to come down on me. October 18th, he brought himself a witness, another battalion chief, the safety officer, the safety division battalion chief. They come up there together and sit in front of me. And it doesn't go well for me in a sense. It gets the emotions get high because I'm like, you guys are violating my rights. And of course, they don't think they do because they're in a big club, just like George Carlin said. They're in a big club and I'm not in it. I'm sitting there and I'm like, why haven't any of you guys came and talked to me? Let's have a conversation. But no, they didn't. So they wrote me up, and then they also wanted to present me with EAP to send me to behavioral counseling because I chose not to wear a mask to go to my annual physical. So now we're trying to say that I'll have a behavioral problem. There's a rebuttal process that you have, and I went through it. I rebuted it, if you will, and it got kicked back. And the funny thing, the reason it got kicked back is because they failed all the policies of due process with the fire department and the city policy. So because they didn't give me my due process, they kicked it back to pending. And then they redid it all over again. And that's something because they didn't follow policy, all they had to do was just back up and punt and just start to play over again. So they did that again. And they presented that to me sometime in probably late February. And this whole time I'm barely at work. I'm in and out of work because my son is just, he's sick. He'd had a lot of problems going on at that time. And he's just gotten to the point now where he's fairly stable. He still has issues and stuff, but this whole mask thing, the reason I'm standing on this hill is because like I was telling you right before we started, My son, when he was going to his regular visits, his follow-up visits from all the issues he was having with low hemoglobin, oxygen is what's carried on your hemoglobin. Your hemoglobin was what distributes oxygen throughout your body. His count was right around 5 and 6. And I'm just so you know, the 10 years I worked in the ER, we used to have a little bet that we could look at somebody and say, hey, I bet you their hemoglobin of 9 or 10 or 11, because these people look like zombies. You know, they're dying, essentially. And so my son was able to walk into an ER or walk into the clinic with a hemoglobin of 5 and 6, which most adults would not be able to do that at all. And they want to cover his face.
Yeah.
And then one day, out of the blue, going to the office like we typically do, the security goes ballistic on us. Just goes ballistic on us. And so it blew up. And this was probably 6 months later, that at the end of that blew up in our face. And now then I had to go and fight for him, my son, in the middle of all of these administrators at this children's hospital. It was like probably 4 administrators, all the way up to the director of the hospital, all the way down to a representative from the clinic. And I'm sitting there, I can't understand how you guys don't see that my son's hemoglobin's 5, right? And you want him to wear a mask into this just for what? Is he not safe here? Who's not safe? You know, he's trying to survive, and you're basically, and I told him, I said, you're trying to kill him. This would be murder if you put a mask on his face with a hemoglobin of 5. I said, give me a break. And eventually they're like, okay. So what do they have to do for us? They had to bring us in the hospital, Jim Crow style, and come through a service elevator, go around the back, come up the back side of the clinic. So my son, he had to walk a whole lot further. And at the time, he was getting kind of short-winded at times. Walk a whole lot further, go up a service elevator, and come in through a back door. So my son, this is the things that I've done for my son, and most people wouldn't do that. They would just put a mask on their child, and I see it over and over again, and they would just carry them right up to the office, and they'd be so short-winded. I've seen so many kids in that hospital that can't breathe, and their parents are just chill with it. Matter of fact, they'll sit there, be in a little Starbucks line in the hospital, waiting to get their little Starbucks, but where they could just walk out the door and go to a Starbucks out in public where their child doesn't have to wear a mask any longer, where they can breathe.
It's a little ironic at this point that the mask mandates, even at airports and on airplanes, have been lifted, but you're still waging this battle because you didn't want to wear a mask during your physical. Did you ever put that in writing to your battalion chief, to anyone at the fire department, that the mask is dangerous for you in terms of health because of tachycardia, things of that nature?
Good evening, SFR leadership. I want to start by saying thank you for giving me a platform to initiate this critical dialogue. The information attached to this email will consist of case law, CDC, HHS data, VAERS report, and OSHA. Since beginning the mask wearing policies back in 2020, as a paramedic and advocate, I began to monitor my vitals. My baseline pulse was in the 60s, and blood pressure was roughly 100 systolic daily. However, after calls to service where facial coverings were required, regardless of type, N95, surgical, or personal mask option, my vitals were significantly increased. I also started to notice the effects of our crews. The vast majority of our crews on various scenes were short-winded while performing a mundane task. Of course, work of breath increased with exertion. I also noticed numerous crew members sweating profusely and other skin color presentations associated with compromised breathing during patient care or other calls to service, even during cool and cold days. As an allied health professional paramedic, my year-long observations are overwhelming from an assessment perspective related to myself and my coworkers on various scenes. I believe that as an organization, we should review some long-standing OSHA standards and definitions.
Something that we're noticing in our area a lot of is a lot of patients are having ablations. My ex-wife, who's double vaxxed, just had an ablation. She's 40 some years. She's like 41 years old.
What's an ablation?
So an ablation is a procedure where basically they send you away, like they go into through like your radial artery, or they go up through your thigh, and they basically go in there and burn away certain pacemakers in your heart. You got multiple pacemakers in your heart, and they'll go and burn away certain pacemakers to potentially correct an arrhythmia, typically atrial fibrillation. And she was having atrial fibrillation. And a lot of times, when I've seen almost every single person that's ever had an ablation at her age, it's got like an 80% failure rate. Basically, she's probably going to be on some high dose med eventually, or have an actual pacemaker installed. That's usually what happens.
So you're seeing a rise in heart-related issues and calls for paramedics help because of heart-related issues?
Oh yeah, massive. And it's kind of ironic that me and my crew has worked several cardiac arrests that is sub 50 years old. And when you start doing compressions, we're starting to see this fountain phenomenon. When I mean fountain, like a fountain of blood come out of their mouth. I'm sorry if that's graphic, but it is what it is. You start doing you maybe get 30 seconds in on compressions, and then you just get this fountain of blood. It just goes everywhere.
Good Lord.
And actually, my last shift was like last Wednesday. I was coming in, and our crew already seen that multiple times already. For the ones we worked, and the ones we didn't work, where we just pronounced on scene, what we're seeing is blood all over the place on both ends. We're seeing a lot of that. And the crew was like, they were talking, man, we saw this weird thing. And before I got to say anything, one of my partners that worked a cardiac arrest like that, he said, let me guess, y'all had a blood fountain. And they're like, what? How'd you know? He just said, lucky guess.
So are these people all dying for the most part? I mean, you can't save these people, can you?
Yes, you cannot. No. Once you have that type of blood come out of somebody's mouth, it's a wrap. It typically means all that was in their lung. Had a drowning event before you got there.
For the audience who's listening to your story, who might just say, well, you should have just wore the mask to get through that day to get your physical. The problem with that, guys, as you know, is that when you agree to go along with the madness of this whole thing, you consent to insanity. And for many of us, that's where we've drawn the line.